I was of the first generation of dancers who had their training in this country. So there hadn't been any kind of any history to compare it to, or anyone to look up to as a role model for somebody who had done it. It was very difficult because I didn't know what form or shape my career might take, and I was all set to do medicine, and I was very passionate about being a doctor. Yeah, so if I still feel if I hadn't been a dancer, the only thing I'd want to be is a doctor. And at the time, I went through so many changes of heart in terms of what I would study, because I felt if I was going to study medicine, my time that I would have to dance, even as a hobby, would be so limited that it would frustrate me. At least I knew that much about me, that if I wasn't doing something like the whole way, it wasn't going to be good enough for me. I have to do one or the other. And it just was a coincidence, and I suppose my luck, that the Arts Council announced this bursary for the generation of South Asian dancers who had been trained in this country. It was an opportunity for them to go to India and train full-time, because there was no provision for that here in the UK. So I applied for that, and I was able to go and study with the Dhananjayans in India. So I was there for a 2-year stint full-time, which was really the most gratifying time of my life as a dancer, I think, because I was able to soak myself up in all this knowledge and culture around me. It gave me a very holistic and all-rounded experience of training, and I felt very well equipped when I came back here. And that was in 1991 that I finished that training and came back here. And of course, then it was like, what do I do now? My parents were livid, because we don't come from an artist family. There's nobody in my family who has done anything even vaguely related to the arts, and there was nobody who could, within my family, who could guide me or say to me, okay, well, you could do this or not. So the only thing my parents could think of was, why don't you teach? And I was really young. I didn't want to teach. I just wanted to dance, and I wanted to create dance. And my idea of being a professional dancer was that I would be able to dance performances of solo margams all the time, and that's, I could just wake up in the morning and practice all day long and perform. But it's been nothing like that. And I gave in to the pressure of having to do something that was looking like a job, because there was an earning from it. So I started my school way back then in 1991, and it's now, when I look at it, I think it's probably one of the best decisions I made, because it's been the constant, the bread and butter, the security. The idea was that I would get performances that I would, just be able to constantly refining and expanding my solo repertoire. But I very soon found out that there wasn't really much of a demand for that. I remember, having this old typewriter that I used to type letters on and post them to promoters like all over the country, abroad, everywhere, and literally nothing came back from it. And then, of course, you get advice that you can apply to the Arts Council to do projects. And then, of course, you find out that you can't do just what you want. You have to fit into what they want to fund. So then you have to learn to adapt your ideas and meet the requirements to be able to get funding. So that's how it all started, and that's where my company then came into being. And I was soon creating productions and becoming probably more of a manager than a dancer, or administrator, fundraiser, producer, everything all in one. The first production I did was it was called Meetings. It was very much along the format of a margam, but it was looking at poetry, works of Mirabai and Surdas, and Pushkala Gopal helped me with that production. So she composed the music for it, and she helped me with the research material and to put it together. So it followed the format of a margam, so it was still something that was in my comfort zone. Then the second production I did was called Golden Chains, and that was taking me a little bit away from what I was used to, and it was on the subject of domestic violence. And so I did a lot of research, probably a lot more than I needed to do, but I wanted to do it like fully and feel like I'd gathered enough knowledge about the subject before I made a work, so that I was making a work responsibly or with proper insight. I remember interviewing lots of women who were the subject of domestic violence, so I had made contact with women's groups and refuges. And then I worked with Kumudini Nakhya in Ahmedabad, so I went there and devised the choreography there. So she and I choreographed it together, and so it ended up being a production with one Kathak dancer and 2 Bharatanatyam dancers. From that point, I felt I would like to make productions that had themes that were outside of the traditional themes used in classical dance, which are primarily based on mythology. I feel that's a way of breaking any barriers that people may have, religious barriers, cultural barriers, and language barriers. You still do have people who appreciate classical Indian dance if they don't understand the language, but if they understand the language, I think they enjoy it more. Or when they watch a solo classical dance performance, they feel they need to understand the language to be able to appreciate what's happening on stage. That was the early 90s when I did Meetings and Golden Chains, and up to 1998, I had productions that were more or less yearly, and they were all 2 recorded music scores. And then I had a little bit of a break in between because I had my 2 older children. And then in 2001, Pali Chandra and we started working on the production called She. And that was the first production that I toured with live music. And it was like kind of the start of a new way of working, and that was the first production that Yadvan worked on with me. So 2002 we toured She, and the Place Prize was in 2006. By that time, my work had developed in a way that I was starting to have musicians integrated within the choreography. So they were very much a part of the story. They were characters in the work. I had a lot of resistance from musicians. They were very reluctant to even sit apart physically on stage. They felt insecure if they were not right next to each other like they're used to being. My first experiment was to have them in 4 corners. So a lot of opposition. And with that also, they had to memorize whatever they were playing or singing. They weren't allowed to use a written script on stage. I only later found out that they all cheated by having something written on their hands and things like that. And I started working more with UK-based musicians. I found them to be a little bit more open-minded about getting up and walking. If you have the right mix of people, it can be so much fun. And I got to a point in my own dance career there where I was feeling quite content not to be on stage. It was so fulfilling to sit in the audience and to watch them and to watch all the fine-tuning that had been done in rehearsal come into effect, and to sit there feeling satisfied or have notes for the next rehearsal. Whereas if I'm in it, I have to focus a lot on myself, and I don't get to see what's happening. I convinced myself that I should. When I had my next 2 children, I think I needed it for myself to prove to myself that I could still dance, because it's quite difficult. Your body takes quite a beating when you've had 4 children, and 4 children by cesarean. So I was, and I was so much older when I had the younger 2. So it was my self-confidence had suffered quite a lot, and I had to do it for myself more than anything else. But as I get older, I feel that just for my physical well-being, even my mental well-being, even if I'm not performing, just practicing from time to time is so necessary. I don't think there's going to be a time when I shouldn't, where I'll think, oh, I don't even need to practice anymore, because that's not even relevant to being on stage anymore. It's more for my own well-being. I wanted a production where I could just dance and not worry about the choreography and the rehearsing of it. So that was Women Are From Venus. And the piece that he made for the ensemble was, he says, Nina, I want you and 4 male dancers. So he had this vision. So when that happened, there were not 4 male dancers here in the UK that I could engage. So I brought dancers from India. They were all from India. So when I had 4 male dancers available to me, I had to think about what I could do with 4 male dancers. So by default, I started creating productions that had 4 male dancers and 4 male musicians. And then because I had that, then I was touring with that, and I had to think about the next production for the following year. So for several years, I had an all-male cast, and it kind of became the signature of my company. And I didn't think about it too much because it was Quick was a piece about people working in London City and in a high-flying kind of corporate job, and they would wear a shirt and a tie and trousers. It was just the logical thing to do. It wasn't like something that I thought about too much. It wasn't like I was trying to make a statement or something. It was just the idea for Quick came like Yadavan and I were walking in sort of in central Harrow, the shopping area, and we were at a pedestrian crossing, and the lights turned. So like the crossing, so the lights had turned red for the cars, and so that we could walk. And you can see like impatience when the cars had to stop, because if it's not like a regular traffic signal, then they will, do they have to go and cross the road now? So I remember him commenting that, look at how impatient people are. They haven't got patience even like to stop at a light for a few seconds. And that was it. That was my whole piece from there. That just created this whole idea in my head. Whilst I was still making productions that was requiring an all-male cast, which went on until I think 2011, 2012. I was bringing dancers from abroad, or it was like Suraj. Even Suraj was here till 2012, then he moved to Belgium. So till then I was bringing dancers from India because there weren't that many male dancers doing full-time dance work here in the UK. I then next toured Jham in 2013 to 2015, and for that I had Suraj and 2 other dancers who I've trained, so they were UK-based dancers. And working with dancers who are from the UK, so that was my first time working with dancers from the UK, and they were my own students, so they were not full-time dancers. They're in other careers, so they had to take time off from their regular jobs and make some time commitment for full-time work with the company for a short period of time. So it's only in the last couple of years, actually during the pandemic, that I've worked with dancers who are from the UK. There are a lot more full-time dancers now in the UK than there were when I first started making work. So there's more choice, and also recently I've been making work that is an amalgamation of Kathak and Bharatanatyam dances, and so I have more choice, and that's why I have chosen to work with dancers here in the UK. Also, my style of touring has changed, because if you have dancers coming from abroad, then you need to cram all the touring into a very short space of time. It's difficult to sometimes be able to set up a tour in that way. You have to have more flexibility with your dates. I still do think that there's a lot of tick box happening, especially in terms of programming dance. I think we still do have this problem of maybe being all of us vying for the same one slot that they will give for South Asian dance. There are definitely venues who are still doing that and operating in that way, and because they have to fulfill their own agenda, then you get a slot for that reason. So that is definitely still a problem.